Aloha, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Triple F Show. I'm Eva Andrade, your host, and I'm here once again with my partner in crime, Fritz Rolfing, who is an attorney right here in the state of Hawaii. And we are going to delve into the first constitutional amendment question. So please stay tuned because you want to know how to answer this. Fritz.
Yes, Eva.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Do we feel like we have just spun through time?
Oh, yes.
Because I met you on this issue.
This is funny because, we're talking about 30 years ago, and that's probably the last time I went up Kunia Road.
Yes. Oh, my gosh. Yes, Fritz came through the snow and the rain and the hurricanes just to be here on the show today. So thanks for that. So let's do this. So we're going to be talking, there are two constitutional amendment questions that are going to be on the ballot. And this is for everybody in the state of Hawaii. So even if you're listening from
Every
a different island, you're going to have this question. We're going to put the question up on the screen for those of you that want to look at this. But before we talk about the question, let's talk about the history of the question. And I think that that'll give people a good idea of understanding what they're wanting to do now.
Yep. It's a long history, but it began with some folks that wanted to get married in 1991.
Was it three couples?
Three couples, right? But they were same-sex couples. And so based on the law in place at the time, the marriage law, the Department of Health said, we need to have one man and one woman in order to have a marriage. And that wasn't what they were planning on. So the Department of Health declined to issue them marriage licenses, and they filed a lawsuit in the circuit court, which is the regular civil court in Hawaii. And they lost their case initially at the trial court level, but they appealed up to the Hawaii Supreme Court that reversed the judge's decision in favor of the Department of Health and against the plaintiffs, and said, we think there should be a presumption that this is unconstitutional because it looks to us like it discriminates based on sex. So unless you can show a compelling need to interpret the law this way, deny the marriage licenses, you need to grant them because it's unconstitutional. And so the lower court, with another judge, looked at it a second time with the Supreme Court's opinion in front of them and said, yep, that's right. It looks like it's unconstitutional. And so they had prevailed, and then the legislature decided, well, we need to, with a lot of encouragement from folks like yourself, said we need to figure out a way to go back to the way we think that the marriage law ought to be understood and that it should be constitutional. And the way to do that was to pass a constitutional amendment.
You know, I think while we're having this conversation, it's good to remind people that Hawaii was on the cutting edge, because even before this, we did reciprocal beneficiaries. You remember that?
Well, that's right. Correct. That came out. Came out as this whole process was going on.
Because we heard them, right, that they wanted to have benefits, right? That's all that this was in the beginning, right? We need the benefits. And so we heard them. And what a lot of people don't know, and it's funny because now that this issue is coming up again, I'm having these conversations with people didn't realize that our reciprocal beneficiary, it was not based on marriage. It was based on anyone who could not legally get married. And so it wasn't just couples. Right. It could have been an uncle and a niece. Right. And I thought
it could have been a brother, sister, or any situation that would not qualify for marriage, but people that wanted to be able to have rights that were similar, not in every respect, like not in the case of adoption, but almost every other right was provided through that reciprocal beneficiaries law.
Yep, which makes me laugh because we were told all along, we just want the benefits. We don't want to get into the schools, right? I'm remembering all of the arguments. No, this is not going to be about what the schools are teaching. No, this is just about benefits. Right. So we gave them benefits.
Right.
But in the meantime, the lower court says no, but the higher court says yes. And so we thought, okay, then this needs to go to the legislature, because one of two people have to make this decision, either the courts
right.
or the legislature, right?
Right.
Somebody's got to define what this means.
Right.
Right. So
and the people are sovereign. So through the legislature, and through the constitutional amendment, they decided that it should be the legislature that determines.
And you remember the motto back then?
Refresh my recollection.
It was, okay, wait, I had it and then I lost. I'm getting old now. It was, let the people decide.
Okay.
That's what the motto was,
that.
right?
Yeah.
Save Traditional Marriage was the group back then that we were all part of.
Right.
So it was no one particular group. It was a coalition of people that raised $900,000-ish to do the education, because the question that was put forth to the people in 1990, and I know I'm giving flashbacks to the people listening that voted, the yes meant no and the no meant yes.
You mean the yes meant no to same-sex marriage, yes to traditional marriage,
yes,
and no meant yes to same-sex marriage, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And we had to spend all this money to get people to understand the question. And when the vote went to the people in 1998, there was only 2% blanks.
Yeah. And most times when you have a constitutional amendment, and a lot of times there's not very much discussion about them, going in, because there's no personality normally associated with the issue, and not a lot of money goes into educating people about it. And that's why I always get calls before a general election. Hey, I see there's these questions. Could be the city charter or could be the state constitution. How should I vote? I said, well, you need to read it, and then this is what it says. And if you vote this way, it's going to mean that.
Well,
okay.
We just had Augie T on the show as a councilman to go over the charter question. So that was last week's show. And Augie was cracking up because reminds me, he's a normal person. And you're looking at these questions, and normal people are like, what does this even mean, right?
Yep.
So we kind of had a little back and forth on why they have to make these questions so convoluted, right? But in any case, it was overwhelmingly passed by the people. Almost 70% of the people wanted to support traditional marriage between one man, one woman. And it passed handily. And although, we know that the federal government made marriage now between same-sex couples, that's law of the land now. People
based on the U.S. Constitution.
Based on the U.S. Constitution. So
now, just before you get into that, you did give me some of the articles, clippings from back in that time in 1998. There was a really great article. This was written by Mike Ewan, who was with the Star Bulletin. That was the name of the paper at the time. And the headline really says it all, because both sides spent about the same amount. I think the negative side that was against the amendment spent a little more, but it was pretty close. But the analysis in the paper, which I think is a good one, said yes won, meaning the yes side won, with focus and a clear message. And that's the key to persuading anybody, right? Is focus and a clear message, because if it gets muddled, confusing, muddied, people won't know. People won't understand it, and they'll just not vote. And in that case, it would have been the equivalent of a no vote.
Yeah, and I think that the other side who wanted people to vote no, I do remember that a lot of their ads were, I don't want to say it was confusing, but I think that they tried to pile so much in there on civil rights and all this kind of stuff that I think people got overwhelmed with what they were saying that it was going to do. Whereas our message was very clear. If you support traditional marriage, you vote yes.
Right. Right.
But even though the question, which was interesting, it's shall the legislature, we reserve the right to the legislature to wait. I want to make sure I'm saying that exactly correct. We left the power to reserve marriage to opposite sex couples to the legislature.
Correct.
That was what we put in the Constitution. But I know there was confusion. Well, does that mean that they could define it anyway? Right?
Right.
And then in 2013, I know the AG did an opinion to Senator Leslie Hara explaining that, well, technically it does give them the power to define marriage any way they want.
Right.
Right. And we like that. We like that the legislature gets to decide. Yeah. So we know that
it was considered better than the alternative, which is to let the courts just make the decision, right?
And really that's the crux of what's being asked of us now on the ballot, right?
That's exactly right.
We fast forward all of it now, and now the question is, do we take that out of the Constitution, thereby leaving it back to the courts to decide?
Right.
Right?
Right. That's it.
So okay. So we're encouraging people, Hawaii Family Forum is encouraging people to vote no, because we think the legislature should be the place to have the power to decide on marriage. And you know what? In the future, now the two miracles, this is what I tell everybody, two miracles would have to happen for this to even come into play anyway. Number one, our U.S. Supreme Court would have to overturn the marriage law. Mm-hmm. And do we think that's going to happen? Do you think that's going to happen in our lifetime?
I just don't know. I've given up predicting what courts will do.
Well, that's true, and I have to admit that I never thought I'd see the overturn of Roe in my lifetime. I remember thinking that's not going to happen, and it did. So maybe I should not decide that either. But they would have to do that first, and just like Roe, throw the decision back to the states.
Right.
Right. So if they threw it back to the states right now, with it being in the Constitution, then the legislature has that power.
Right.
So if the legislature wanted to change marriage back to one man and one woman, they could do it.
Right.
And that's what's bugging the other side.
That's it.
Because if it's removed, so if people vote yes on this and it's removed, then it goes back to the court decision?
Yes. Yeah. So if one of your, what you called miracles, if something that seems unlikely that the U.S. Supreme Court said, we no longer think that it's unconstitutional in violation of the U.S. Constitution to limit marriage to one man and one woman, then the Hawaii courts would be the ones to decide, and there's already a decision, a 30-year-old decision on the books that says, under the Hawaii Constitution, it's not constitutional to limit marriage to one man and one woman. So
now you and I were having a conversation yesterday. Well, it's not going to be yesterday to the people listening and watching, but we were talking about what the leaving it to the courts to decide could have potential ramifications down the road later if somebody doesn't like. So okay, so let's do the two miracles, right? The Supreme Court sends it back to the states. This amendment is accepted by the people, and so they remove the language that's in there. Thereby, now our Constitution is up to the judges to interpret.
Right. The legislature would not be able to basically change the law.
Yeah, their hands are tied.
Right.
And we have a judge, and so we have, I don't know, a polyamorous couple that now sues for the right to marriage, and the Supreme Court hears it.
Right. Now that could happen even now, but that amendment there is kind of a cautionary tale. That
right.
You want to be a little, if you're a court, you want to be a little careful about how far you you go with your decisions. But if the amendment is removed, as that's what the proponents of the yes vote want, then that sends a signal, that perhaps we can push a little further.
Right. Like, is there a reason for it to happen now? Because right now they have someone in a same-sex relationship, they have every right to get married right now because that's what the law says. So that language being in our Constitution does not stop them from getting married.
No.
And our legislature couldn't even right now make a law saying that it's
Correct.
only between opposite sex couples.
So the legislature changed the law that they passed in 2013, legalizing same-sex marriage. The courts would say it doesn't matter.
Right.
You have to allow it. It's unconstitutional to change it from that to what it was before.
Well, see, that's kind of what I want people to get out of the show today. I want them to understand that if they vote yes and the language is removed, then it's the courts that have the power.
Right.
And depending on what case comes up, and Jim used to always talk about this, right? Getting the right person with the right case to make the right, argument. The people have nothing to do with this, right? There is no more public input at that point. The court
in Hawaii, judges are not elected; the judges are appointed. So,
which is a good time to remind our people to vote, because the person they vote for could end up being the person that makes these appointments.
Right.
So pay attention to who you're voting for on the ballot. Now, if people vote no, though, and this language stays in there,
right,
then nothing changes immediately.
Right.
And the only time that language would come into play is if the two miracles happen. I didn't talk about what the second miracle is. The second miracle would be that our legislature would have to make that decision.
Right.
Which means you'd have to have a pretty conservative legislature.
It would be different from the way it is now. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think that the reason, at least in my own research, why this came up now is because there was one Supreme Court justice who made the argument during the Roe case in the opinion that same-sex marriage should be under the same arguments as the Roe arguments. And I think they saw that as, oh no, the Supreme Court may try to overturn. What is the marriage law? I always want to say DOMA, but it's not DOMA. DOMA was a whole other thing.
That was a federal.
Yeah.
That was a federal law that attempted to preserve traditional marriage.
That was the good thing.
And that, that was found unconstitutional. And then later, state laws were found to conflict with the U.S. Constitution in the Obergefell decision in 2015.
Obergefell, yes.
Right, written by Justice Anthony Kennedy. Wrote the majority decision.
Okay, so that's the marriage law that would have to be overturned.
The case would have to be overturned.
Okay.
It would be overruled.
Yeah. So I guess one Supreme Court justice out of 7 was enough to make them nervous.
Well,
9. That's right, 9.
Out of the number, I guess there were 6, right, in the majority.
Yeah.
And 1 out of the 6 kind of speculated and said, if we're being consistent, we should go look at that other decision.
Yes.
Right.
So is this an overreaction in your own personal opinion? I mean, I know it's speculation, and I know I understand that lawyers absolutely hate speculation. But I mean, it does seem odd that it's happening right now. Unless there's something down the road.
I would not have put it on my bingo card for the 2024 election. I think there's a lot of other things going on, but people are also kind of stirred up about the conservative majority on the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yeah.
So that it kind of bleeds over into a lot of different things, and so you might be a little bit overly cautious on their part, but here we are.
What we're hearing, though, and again, it goes back to elections. What we're hearing is there have been some speculation that they want to increase the size of the Supreme Court.
That's not speculation; it's a proposal to go to. I think it's to go to. Is it 15 or 14?
Exactly.
15 judges.
So depending who wins this election.
Right.
That could be on the docket, and all of this, it would be even more moot, right? If you end up having 14, well, actually, how many? So we have, how many conservatives on the Supreme Court right now? Is it 6 or 5?
I guess 6 if you count everybody.
Who's a conservative or at least conservative leaning. Yeah. So if they go to 15, then the chance of the marriage law.
Yeah. The interesting thing about going to 15 is it can be done through legislation. The U.S. Constitution doesn't limit
right.
the number of justices on the Supreme Court.
And I think that was wise, but I don't think our founding fathers imagined that the world would be where it is today. I really don't. I know when Chad Blair from Civil Beat called me for a statement on this constitutional amendment question, I was thinking to myself, well, we cut our teeth, or I cut my teeth on this issue. So of course we want to do education on it. But I was thinking, I'll tell you what people are concerned about. The price of the gas that's going in their car, whether they can buy groceries, whether they can pay their outrageous maintenance fees and insurance fees. I mean, those are the real issues people care about. And here's the bottom line. We're not taking anybody's rights away by voting no on this constitutional amendment. So I don't want anybody to listen to any false information that might be out there that if you vote no, you're taking away anybody's rights.
Right.
Because nobody's marriage is going to be affected by a no vote.
It won't have an immediate impact on either side, really.
Yeah.
But it's on the ballot, so we have to make a decision, right?
Right.
And if we make no decision, well, that would actually be a no vote.
Yeah. So,
but it's better to say yes or no.
Yeah,
I mean,
we want people to be clear. And I think you made a good point that if you voted yes in 1998, and you still believe that traditional marriage is the best for society and the best for the upbringing of children, then you should vote no.
That's a logical argument.
Right. And so if you're listening to this and you're remembering 1998 and you remember voting yes and you still support traditional marriage, then you can vote no and not take away anybody's rights. Right? Because I think people can get scared. People don't understand the issue and they're told you'll take away the rights.
Right.
Or you'll strip same-sex marriage couples of their rights.
And that's a compelling argument when people make it, right?
If that's true, it would scare me.
We don't want to take people's rights away.
Right. So. Because all of us here in the state, we know people who are in these same-sex relationships. I mean, it's different than it was in 1998. Remember that, Fritz? I remember we could get churches and pastors and people were coming out in droves on the issue, and now they almost put a cross up like we're vampires because people, right? Now it's different. There are same-sex couples that are married today, and they're part of our families and they're part of our communities. So this is just a clear, easy way to leave it to the people to decide, and they can only do that through the legislature.
Well said.
Okay. That's great. Okay, so what are there any going through all those articles, was there anything that really leaped off the page? Did you go down memory lane and do you remember the night of the vote when we were waiting on the election?
I do. I remember watching TV. I was at home on that one, and it was interesting. I actually think the issue, the constitutional amendment on the ballot, increase the turnout in that election, and I think it might have affected how the governor's race turned out that year.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. In fact, I was looking at some of those articles, and I was surprised that Linda Lingle lost by only 5,000 votes.
Right.
Against then Governor Cayetano.
Yeah, but it's hard to figure out which way the issue cut. I think with higher turnout, I think that actually helped Governor Cayetano with his reelection. So.
Oh yeah, and
that I'm not speaking as a lawyer there.
Right.
I'm just speaking as an amateur political observer.
Right.
That,
it's interesting too, because the other thing we were talking about recently is the long game, right? The other side, they're good at the long game, right? I mean, 1994 was the court decision, but it started in 91.
Correct.
So from 1991 until
I think it was 93 that the court decision, but you're right in the
it was right in the ballpark.
We're just talking about 1 year, but 91, that was the beginning.
Right, and 2013 was the passage of same-sex marriage here in Hawaii, right?
By the Hawaii legislature.
Right, but we're not even taking into account the civil unions, the reciprocal beneficiaries, right? All the steps that led up to that. Right. And now here it is 10 years later, and it's back on the ballot.
Yeah. I mean, you could see in some ways it seems kind of like a mop-up campaign.
Yeah.
But sometimes mop-up campaigns don't go real well.
Well, it is interesting because you would think even moderates and even liberals would appreciate the vote being in the power of the people. I mean, that's what our Constitution says, right? All power resides in the people.
Right.
So you would think that they'd be okay with that, but not unless you want to win, right? If you want to win, then you want the courts to make that decision for you.
Wherever you have the best forum, that's who you want to make the decision.
Yep. I do remember the night of the 1998 vote, though, because I was with the group of people that were pushing for the yes vote. We were pushing for the yes vote. And yes is always harder on a constitutional amendment.
Right.
So
that came out of a decision about 10 years earlier where it had to do with whether we should have a constitutional convention.
Oh, yes, the con.
And the vote, if you just took the yes and the no votes, it was the yes votes, there were more yes votes than no votes. But then the Hawaii Supreme Court looked at the issue and said, well, if you read the Constitution carefully and correctly, we have to also consider ballots that were left blank as ballots cast, and therefore you don't have a majority of the ballots cast. So that's where we get the saying a blank is equivalent to a no vote.
Now, they did try to change that this past legislative session.
Did they really? I was not aware of that.
Yes, they had a bill that was going to get rid of the blank means no. Yeah. It moved through a couple of committee hearings, but it ended up dying. So we'll have to watch that. In fact, after today, I'll send it to you so you can see what they were trying to do.
I'm glad to hear it. It's too confusing and it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
To if people don't feel that they have enough information to vote one way or the other, it shouldn't be considered a no. It's just a abstain, right?
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, we want to be fair to the people. And so that's, again, so what we're doing is we're encouraging everybody right now to take a moment. When you get your ballot, do not throw it in the rubbish can. You have to vote. If you're having a hard time picking between candidates, remember that you have down ballot races that also mean a lot. So don't just toss it aside. And these constitutional amendment questions, they mean something. So take a time, read it. Visit hawaiifamilyforum.org. We've got information on the 2 ballot questions. On the next show, I'll be with Jim Hochberg, and we'll talk about the 2nd ballot question. So you'll get more information about that one. We had Augie T last week on the charter amendments. We want you to raise your voice, and we want you to do it in a way that you're educated. So make sure that you do that. Fritz, I appreciate you taking the time to come all the way out here.
Thanks for inviting me.
So in this last second, remember to like this video, share, subscribe, hit that notification button so you know every time we upload a new video. And when you have the ballot in front of you, if you support traditional marriage, vote no. And if you want that language to be removed from the Constitution, then vote yes. We'll see you all next week. Mahalo, everybody.
Mahalo.